You're listening to the Emissary Authors Podcast, where we help faith-driven founders and entrepreneurs tell the stories that matter. This episode was made possible in part by the Emissary Author Workshops and our title of the week, The Hope of War, from Emissary author Larry Cripps. Go to publishwithemissary.com/workshops and thehopeofwar.com for more details. Welcome to the Emissary Authors Podcast. My name is Paul Edwards. This is my co-host and partner in crime, Jason Todd. And we are excited to bring you this week's episode. We're going to interview an old friend of mine going back a few years now. We appeared on each other's shows. We linked up through a podcast network where there was an exchange for hosts and guests and people who were doing both, and we were doing both. And so we really hit it off. And when it came time to look for people who had experience marketing books, which is what we're going to talk about today, I thought we got to get this gentleman on the show. So Andrew Kaplan is going to join us for this episode. And Jason, he's going to share with us how, a book that he has now since written called The 3 Words I Used to Sell 100,000 Books. But the book that he actually sold 100,000 copies of was the book I first interviewed him about, which is called The Last Law of Attraction Book You'll Ever Need to Read. And so this is going to be an exciting interview.
Well, one of the things I'm most excited about with this interview is the practical steps that he took instead of the theoretical steps that he took, do this and hypothetically you'll get these results, but the actual steps that he took to sell 100,000 books. And I tell you what, like we've always talked about, if you have a message that you think is going to change the world, you owe it really to the world and to yourself to get good at sharing that message. And we can all learn something from Andrew. Andrew, welcome to the Emissary Publishing Podcast.
Hey, Paul and Jason, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here. And, in case anyone ends up looking for me after this, my pseudonym is Andrew Cap. I shorten my name, and I'm bringing this up because authors might face this challenge. And Andrew Kaplan was already out there publishing books. So you never know what you're going to have to do to pivot when you're moving forward in something. So I figured I'd bring that up as one example where I just shortened it to Cap. It wasn't taken, and I was off to the races.
That's a great example to bring right out of the gate when we're talking with authors who want to name their books. A lot of times they're going to be overlapping on somebody else's book or overlapping on some universal concept that's already out there. And you type that into Google, and there's already lots of results. Wading through all of that's going to be very difficult. So you got to one of the keys is what does my domain name look like? Is that available? If the domain is available, then your book name might be available as well. Lot more we can dig into with that. But the Last Law of Attraction Book You'll Ever Need to Read, and then 3 Words I Used to Sell 100,000 Books. That is not an insignificant number. I think by some estimates, something like 99% of books never sell over 100 copies, much less into 100,000.
Yeah, it's really incredible. And I say this with humility. The thing that stands out to me the most about it, for me specifically, obviously, because it's personal to me, is I did this without a publishing, one of the big companies, the big publishers. I didn't have their help. I didn't have some bigwig marketing team. I didn't have a literary agent. I didn't have all these things that we're conditioned to think that we need. And I'm not saying those things aren't helpful or useful. I'm just, kind of underscoring the point that what people think might not be possible or can't be possible is a lot more accessible if you find a way of working smart in addition to working hard. And that's really something that drives me, that I'm excited about, because in the end, no matter how successful or not successful you might be in the moment, I think everyone could always stand to find smarter, more intelligent, more strategic ways of working within whatever industry they're in, or, for being an author and marketing themselves, because no one is ever going to care more about your book or your project than you personally, no matter what is on the line. No one's going to care more than you. So it's really on you to be, to take that extra step in responsibility of figuring out strategies that are really going to push you forward and get your book out to the people that should be enjoying it and reading it.
That's a good point, because a lot of authors, authors that speak to us, expect that the publishing company, it does all of the outreach. And then, the author is just kind of sitting there like, just, tell me what to do. And when in fact, that's not the case. Authors typically have a rigorous schedule of their own, getting the word out about what they're doing, and then going on podcasts and writing blog posts and doing speaking engagements. They are their own, in a lot of ways, self-promoter.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, one thing I underscore in 3 words I use to sell 100,000 books, everything I talk about, it isn't the way, it's a way. And I always underscore that because I don't want to be coming across like this is the only way to do it. And I bring that up because everyone's different, but for me, it's never been a motivating factor to be sitting in a Barnes & Noble doing a chapter reading for 30 people, or even a New York Times bestseller. I'd much prefer to be an Amazon bestseller because even though technically you need more numbers for New York Times in that moment, Amazon is a worldwide, station right there and a worldwide platform. So for me, I use that as a more accessible yet also very more momentous, a lot of momentum kind of standard for making sure I get out there, because that's where people can find out about my book, regardless of what kind of newspaper they read or where their interests might go outside that scope. Because, this is a little generalized, but most everyone is on Amazon, to the point where if you don't have an Amazon account, these days you're looked as a little bit like a little strange of how come you don't at least have one thing that you've bought from Amazon yet.
Yeah. And so right before we started here, Andrew, you shared why you wrote 3 words I used to sell 100,000 books. And I just want to briefly touch there because I think you built this enormous momentum with your Law of Attraction book, and people began to look at it or notice the results. And what happened? So what happened that I don't want to spoil it. I want you to tell the story, but
Yeah. Well, people did notice I was selling a lot of copies, to which someone might ask, well, how does anyone know? Well, it's because I kept telling people. And the reason I kept telling people, really posting on social media, is because I'm looking for any excuse, any positive excuse to mention the book in some kind of relevant way. So, and it's kind of funny. I didn't even think of this, or didn't even occur to me until I hit 40,000 copies. I should have done this at 5,000 and 10,000 and 25,000 and so forth. But at 40,000, it's like, listen, this is a lot. This is really significant, whether you're an independent author or not. Let me celebrate this, because the thing is, regardless of the topic of your book, if at all you can, you want to make your book the party that everyone wants to get into. And you don't want some kind of stringent bouncer keeping them from there. I mean, you want there to be demand, but you also want it to be a very welcoming thing. So how do I include people in the party? I tell them when I hit 40,000 in sales. I tell them 50,000. I certainly tell them 100,000. And, obviously I had, friends in my network on social media. I had fellow authors. I had all these people in business, and they're like, Andrew, can we get on the phone and talk about this? And you tell me what you're doing here. And in the beginning, I could do that, but more and more people kept asking. And I realized, listen, as much as I care about my friends, I can't for free. I feel bad saying, oh, I'm going to charge you money, because the rate will be ridiculous for people. They're like, I thought we're friends. I couldn't sustainably keep just teaching people. I said, you know what? Let me put this in a book and let me break down everything so there's no question, so that the next time somebody asks me, or what's happened even after that is I've got a friend, Andrew, who you don't even know and have no stake in, but I'd like you to get on the phone call with them. I can say, listen, this thing is only $4 on Kindle. It's everything that you need to know. If you had other questions past this, that's one thing. But without at least having this kind of foundation that lays out the whole playbook, a call would almost, it'd be a waste of both our time. So now I've got this thing where anytime someone asks me, anytime they know it's a success, Andrew, what's your secret? Well, I'm not keeping it to myself. Here's this book I wrote called 3 Words I Used to Sell 100,000 Books. Read it. You will, I would hope, not be disappointed at all in the direction I go, because 3 words is kind of like this, this mystery thing here. It isn't just the 3 words. It's how you use the 3 words. It's how the 3 words informs every aspect of your strategy, from marketing to interviews, to the cover, to the title, to anything else that you're doing. It's using those 3 words in a highly leveraged way. And that's what I wanted to get out for people. And that's why I wrote the book. And then I went back to business as usual, promoting more of the Law of Attraction stuff, which I'm comfortable in both. but that's the stuff that I enjoy, which is why I went back to that afterwards.
Yeah. So, so I guess, the next obvious question to me is, what are the 3 words? But I realize that it's not a magic spell. So let's talk about those, but let's also talk about how you leverage them, and what do they mean in context?
Right. Yeah, and so here's the delicate thing, because I don't want to hold back on you, but I want to preface this before we even go in that direction. The 3 words on their own are almost disappointing.
Mhm.
And I usually have people read the first couple of chapters of the book before they hear the 3 words. But here's a little spoiler alert for people. If they go on Amazon and they click the free book preview, in that they're not even spending money, they go into preview, they will hear the words before they have to spend money, so they'll know. I will give this much. The spirit of these words is about looking out for the reader in a way that nobody else is. And what I mean by that is, what can you do? And also another disclaimer, while this is good for fiction, it's really good for nonfiction. What can you do to make your content a true impact in that reader? Not something that they buy the book and you're done with them and great, I got my sale. But what can you do where that content not only gives them the result that the title was promising them, but goes above and beyond in shifting their beliefs and shifting their understanding of the topic, so that any limits that they might have been holding in front of themselves are either completely wiped out, or at the very least really depleted, like just gone. And so it's all about positioning this in a way that you are serving the reader on a much higher level and at a much higher standard, to the point where you're probably going to look back at your book before even publishing it and saying, something's got to change. I've got to step this up even more in a lot of different ways. Because that's where the recommendations come from. That's where the 5-star reviews come from that people end up reading and helping them decide if they're going to get the book. That's where people come out of the blue that you'd never heard of asking you for interviews. That's where you get onto summits that are being attended by thousands of people online because the hosts heard about your book and they saw your style of content delivery, and because they saw you on interviews and are like, oh, this person, he isn't just a talking head, he actually cares. And I want to look good by featuring him or recommending him, because I know by association, if I recommend Andrew to somebody and I recommend his book to someone, I am trusting that they will relate me with their positive experience with this book. So I'm not only happy to do it, I'm excited and motivated to do it because it serves me as the person recommending it. That's why you do things like that.
So one quick question, and then I want to hear what Jason has to say. In your answers there, and this may be tricky for our podcast listeners who are audio only listeners later on. So this is, theater of the mind stuff. In your answers, did you use the 3 words?
Very nearly, yes. Very nearly.
I was wondering.
In other words, let's say someone said
these
running.
are the words.
Yeah, let's say someone uses the word running, but maybe the book title has the word run. You know what I mean? So I kind of snuck the words in there.
Okay, good. I'm just for a bit of fun there, and then Jason, I want to hear your question.
Reminds me of Penn and Teller's Fool Us, where they, there's a magician out front, and then they guess, have to guess.
What's the trick?
Figured out what the trick was, and they're like, I think I snuck a few words in there that kind of told you we know what you're doing. One of the things that stands out for me in what you're talking about is an author needs to reconcile the concept of what they want to say and with how that impacts the reader. And one of the things Paul has heard me say this too many times, probably, but I just when we talk with authors, I'm like, okay, so why should I care? And it sounds abrupt to people when you're like, yeah, okay, why does your reader care? Because the default is I don't care. And that's just how people think. It's very like, I don't care about that. Right. Even to say, well, what would you like for dinner tonight? I don't care. That's not true. You do care. It's just this shorthand. I don't care. So then if we take the shorthand and go, well, why does your reader care? If you can't say it, if you can't articulate the message very bluntly to the reader, as though we're like, we have to hide this. It has to be so unique and wonderful and amazing that they've uncovered this diamond and toiled to go get it. Maybe an author's doing the reader a disservice by not just being very blunt in their writing process. This is why you care. I'm caring for you by thinking about why you care.
Yeah, and also especially again as fiction is its own set of rules and drawing them into the story and things of that nature. But when you're talking about nonfiction and you're talking about someone learning something or doing something or improving an aspect of their life, believe it or not, even after they've purchased your book, and it's going to be hard for authors to hear this because no one knows our topic better than we do in our own minds, which can actually be a fault because that means we might not even be explaining it as well because we might say a sentence and we have an understanding of 1,000 other sentences that aren't being said with it, whereas the reader never got those 1,000 sentences. So it's a new challenge. For me, when someone buying my book, they've spent money on it, they've invested, they're waiting for it in the mail or they're downloading on Kindle or Audible or whatever, to me, that is not an indicator that I've got their attention yet. For me, I resolve from the very first page to fight tooth and nail to keep their attention because I realize that if I lose their attention, they've got, notice I call it the last law of attraction book you'll ever need to read because I know they've got at least 20 other law of attraction books on their shelf. And I guarantee you they have not read all those in their entirety. They read the first 5 in their entirety, maybe the first 6. And then they'd read the first 3 or 4 chapters from one, then, oh, this is nothing new and moving on. For me, I have a copywriter's background. I view the book as it's a 208 sales page. It's a sales letter. It's not selling you on buying a product. It's selling you on why and how the law of attraction works. And most importantly, why and how you could finally implement it where you failed in the past on all the other books. In order for me to successfully do that, as a copywriter, there has to be a flow and a cadence from word to word, sentence to sentence, paragraph to paragraph, chapter to chapter, that delicately and effectively and elegantly builds where each chapter is building on the foundation of the prior thing. 2 minutes ago, I said, they don't know the other 1,000 sentences. But if I give them the sentences first, and then I start stacking other sentences that have that in mind, now I'm strategically finding a way where everything is building up almost like a crescendo, almost like a song where you're hitting the chorus and the bridge. I really view rhythm and pacing as a very necessary aspect in addition to a couple other things, because if they don't read the whole book, they're not going to be excited and motivated to use what it teaches. Therefore, they're not going to get the result. Therefore, they're not going to recommend it to other people. So therefore, they're not going to give it a 5-star review. So it's all about being selfishly selfless in that I'm going to go out of my way to give them an experience and an understanding of the content that they've never had before, knowing that it serves them and it serves me, because this should always be a win-win situation. The author and the reader should both get huge wins out of every reading experience that anyone has with the book.
You bring up a great point that many people buy books and never read them. And especially now, you talk about being on Amazon. Amazon is all about impulse buying. The vast majority of products are purchased actually just because it said, hey, people also buy this with it. It's like, oh, I guess okay. I got $5, and I'll get to that. I'm going to buy that Audible book and I'm going to listen to it in the car on my next road trip that I never take. And suddenly there's, an Audible subscription and 20 books sitting there that you've never listened to. And I hate to count myself among those people, but it's true. And so we sometimes have, like you talk about, we've caught this person in this point of need, and then it sort of fades away. Then they get their book, and then they start digging into it. And now now we're at the new challenge. Now we're unfolding a storyline for them to engage in, rather than just saying, hey, this was so meaningful to me, it must be meaningful to this reader because they clicked buy. That's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
As soon as they open that book, we have to re-engage them.
Yeah. You said, what's in it for me? You have to answer that question on every page in some way, shape, or form. Even if it's indirectly. You have to answer, why should I continue? Why should I read the next paragraph? Why should I read the next page? Why should I read the next chapter? You've got to answer it, and at least have that mindset, because listen, that's a really high standard, and I can't even tell you whether I hit it or not. But if you're thinking that way, you're going to hit it often enough that you're going to carry them through the book, because they'll let you slide on one page. Not that you should think that way and give yourself that room, but they will, so that when you do, in the midst of everything, have a failure here and there to really give them enough reason to go on, you've already earned enough equity with them prior to that they're like, okay, this really good point that Andrew made, that's earned. They're not saying this consciously, they're thinking this subconsciously. This really good point that Andrew made, that's earned them at least another 12 pages of reading to see where we go from here.
This makes me think so much, Jason, of, the time we spend working with authors to really think about, what are you going to put on the cover of your book? Because unless you are an established, globally famous person, and even those people don't have a whole lot of luck pushing their books off the shelves, even if everybody knows who they are. But especially if you're not, if you don't carry that reputation, you got all of a few seconds to hook people's attention, surrounded by several other titles they could look at. Why should they look at yours? Right? And if you don't do the homework of researching the reader, understanding what's important to them, and then structuring your title and especially the upfront content, whatever introduction and forward and preview you give them of what they're going to get when they get in there. If you don't really focus in on that and make it interesting for them to keep turning pages, I wholeheartedly agree. And it's exactly what we spend a lot of time doing, is talking authors off the ledge of saying, well, I'm going to call it, they have some title, and it's like, that, exactly what that means, but the rest of the world has no clue what that means. They have no idea why it's important to you. They have no idea what it, none of that. On the other hand, if you know something that you have successfully communicated to someone else to the point that they've bought it from you or responded to it and engaged with it and adapted it to their own life, then you've got a concept. And now the duty is, as you say, as we always tell people, right, is to get really good at communicating that in a written format without the benefit of eye contact and body language and proximity and intonation. And so anytime that comes along, that's a brilliant strategy to say, I have to earn their attention with each page that's passing. And I might be, 60 pages in, I might be forgiven for going a little bit to the side, but especially in that first little section, I've got to be like, pay attention and here's why, right? And give them a reason to. So I like that.
And if I could, real quick, Paul, just to speak to, you're mentioning about like, I want to call it this. And you're like, well, that's great and everything. But again, and I see this as a fellow author. I'm not separating myself or putting myself on a pedestal when I say this. Authors have a certain measure of ego, and they have a certain artistic vision that they want to follow. And also, they probably don't even admit this to themselves, but they want to look good for their friends and family. And what's going to look good for your friends and family? Well, a book with a cool sounding title. All right. But the problem is, especially when it comes to nonfiction, cool can be also confusing.
Yeah.
Cool can be the death of clarity. Now, my strategy, my perspective is to check my ego at the door. And rather than worrying about a cool sounding title, and maybe I'll get one anyway, but rather than worrying about that, I prefer for the title to sound useful, because that's what it comes down to. You want it to sound like, oh, you want to answer that question of what's in it for me if I buy this book?
Yeah.
Answer it with the title.
Yeah.
Don't do, because like you said, you only got a few seconds for someone's attention. If they're like, again, and people, again, we project. We assume that the attention that we put on this title is going to transfer to everybody there, but they've got kids screaming in the background. They've got their boss on their back about an email they're supposed to return. They're stressed out over their finances. They're scrolling all over social media. Their attention and their minds are scattered. If you give them a title that they've got to decipher, they're just going to give up and move on, because they're scrolling through Amazon looking for an answer, looking for a problem that's going to solve their pain.
Yeah.
So me, I make it straightforward. I make it obvious. I do make it sound obviously intriguing, but I'm not worried about it sounding cool. I just want it to be really useful. I want them to go, I will click on this listing and let me read the book description. Oh, that looks good. And I can see it's already at least, 4 point something stars. Let me scroll down and read some of the reviews. Let me do a little, I'm enough on this that I'm going to research, or maybe I'm just going to buy it now.
Yeah.
Like whatever it might be. You just want to get them. You want to get them to that point. And of course, above all else, you want to deliver on your promise. When they actually get the book, you want them that hope that they put out, that they invested in when they spent that money. You want to actually be able to deliver on that. You don't want to be just another book that ends up on the shelf or in their basement. You want to be the book that stays on their nightstand because it's so valuable. They want to keep it there for a reference guide, even though your book was also so clear that they understand everything already.
Yeah.
That's the kind of book that you want.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you've done now tactically, now that we've built all this up. You're going through the process. And I remember seeing some of your posts about it and all of that. And I'm like, that's a good strategy. I was thinking to myself at the time, but I want the audience to hear some of the practical steps you took, tactics you used, to just keep building towards that 100,000 copies sold figure.
Absolutely. Again, reminding this is a way, not the way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me say that the thing that I did when I first launched, because maybe there are authors listening to this who have the benefit and the luxury of an audience, but maybe you don't. So for those that don't, what do you do? Or for those that do, what can you do to even further enhance that? So there were two things that I did. One was free and one cost money. I was strategic with spending the money. The thing that I did for free, again, this is the Law of Attraction book. I went on Facebook and I found a bunch of Law of Attraction groups. Maybe there was 50,000 people in the group. Maybe there was 2,000 people in the group. I don't care. I joined them all and I started dropping value bomb after value bomb after value bomb, establishing myself as someone that knew what he was talking about and that could explain it in a useful way. And I even repurposed content for my own book. So I didn't have to worry about coming up with new stuff, even though I also did come up with new stuff. I was able to repurpose all the blood, sweat, and tears that I'd already put into that creative effort. And we know how Facebook groups work. You can't be like, by the way, buy my book. By the way, here's a link to click on. By the way, this is me rudely hijacking the forum so that the moderator is going to kick me out. Like, no, you can't do any of that. Yeah. So what I would do instead is I drop value bomb after value bomb after value bomb to the point where people are like, who is this guy? And then they click on my profile, which I have complete control of and can have the huge picture behind me with the book and 5-star reviews and all these readers and claim methods. And then they scroll down and I'm posting all the photos of 5-star reviews. Like I can advertise, but I'm first going to get them excited enough that they click into the zone where I'm not going to be worried about getting kicked out by the moderator.
Yeah.
So I basically hijacked this free content consumption machine and moved it over to a place where I could then tell the reader all about me and motivate them to check out the book. But speaking of Facebook, what I didn't do, again, this is not the way, this is a way, is I did not advertise on Facebook because Facebook is a place where people are just scrolling. And the last thing I want to do is try to get them to spend money and get off their scrolling and get off, checking out their ex-boyfriend and ex-girlfriend, who's cheating on who, what's going on, and try to get them in Amazon. No, I advertised natively on Amazon because that was a place where people were not only in a buying mode, but they were already looking to buy something like my book. So I was very strategic and efficient. If I'm going to spend advertising money, let me spend it in a place where people are looking to buy, where, like, we're talking about impulse buys, where they can't wait to spend that money and they're looking for a book with similar title. Let me put it. So I had the free version and getting as many people as possible to learn about it. I had the paid version, but in a smart way. I had a title that works. I have a cover that works. I have content that hopefully works. So it's all like this ecosystem of everything coming together, but it was anchored by the free social media tactic, Facebook thing, and by advertising natively on Amazon.
And so those are like the major, in some ways it sounds like super simple, but there's context to it, and there's a process you're following there, right? To get that.
Well, also that's the beginning part. Like what happened? Like can't. By the way, it could be a little draining to keep doing Facebook. I mean, believe it or not, I did it so much that within, I think, 10 days of doing it, Facebook flagged me because I was posting too much, because I was copying and pasting the same thing in all these groups. Which, by the way, I got around that was I started changing the first and last sentence, so I didn't have to do all this extra work. Little tip for people there. I'm not sure if the algorithm still lets you do that. But that doesn't exist in the vacuum. You can't just do that. What I then did was I compounded on it. This is where I'm going on interviews and hopefully over-delivering on the value and on the presentation. This is where I'm starting a YouTube channel. This is where I am doing a bunch of other things, but it's all a building thing. I can't do everything at once in the beginning, but as things are happening and as there's momentum, I could say, okay, now it's time to post a YouTube video. I can get people feeling really good and really welcome to email me, because there's this stigma that authors are too busy for their readers and don't get back to them. I could be the guy that gets back to his readers. I could foster that environment. And then when I get really important questions, I could use that for video content on YouTube. So all of a sudden, I'm serving the reader. I'm making them feel good. I'm giving them more bang for their buck without charging them anything. And I'm getting awesome content because they're asking me a question that I can use to post on YouTube to push more people to the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
You bring up an important topic in all of that. And something else that I like to talk about is, if you build it, they will come philosophy is not true. Because the default mode is who are you and why should I care? And there is that hurdle for anything new in our lives, any new relationship, any new book, where you got to get, why should I care? And the percentage of people who really, really, really care enough to dig down deep, pretty small. Whereas what you're talking about, people who just have a general interest in law of attraction or, the roots of that, they might be hanging out there. And as you intercept their normal consumption of educational, but a lot of entertaining content, it splits the difference. Then all of a sudden they start to see you more. They start to expect that you're going to chime in on a particular topic, that you're going to give them something that adds value tangentially in their lives, which now causes them, ironically, to be attracted to you, which, I think many people, the authors that we talk to, they are resistant or don't believe that there's a process of putting in work to get yourself out there. It's not just you write a book and anybody cares, because the default mode is they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah. People think that the second they publish the book, their work is done. And I'm like, no, the second you publish your book, the work is just beginning.
Yeah.
Because no one's going to market it for you the way you can. No one's going to do it but you. No one understands your book like you do. It's got to be on you. And if you want to hire people, just make sure they understand you well. Make sure they're really like, if you have the budget for it, I kind of have the perspective of like, let's assume that we have a new author with no audience, no budget. Can they run the ship themselves? Well, depending on your schedule, depending on your interests, depending on your care, it's certainly possible. It's a question of whether you're going to do it or not.
Yeah.
So getting back to that, then walk us through, let's say, the timeline or the activities during a typical week when you're in that marketing mode. What should an author expect?
So, I mean, because there's like the launch itself, and then there's just a continuation, right? I mean, if you're talking about the launch, well, for me, it's like a 24/7 thing where I'm prepping the Facebook post. I mean, I used to. Now that I have an audience, I leverage it differently. But since it's about 3 words, I sell 100,000 books and starting kind of like from zero. It was all about doing the heavy lifting of researching the Amazon. I was, all right, so we got Amazon keywords that I'm looking to do. We've got Facebook content, Facebook posts. We got going through my book and saying, okay, what is the stuff I can repurpose? I've gone through different situations of hiring people to get me booked on podcasts and kind of reaching out myself. So it's really, especially in the beginning, because you really care about your product and you want to invest in it. It's every waking moment. And some people have jobs not like 9 to 5s. I positioned my days so that I could give that much. And if there was a job that was interfering, well, it's like, okay, well, how many hours do I have? I have 8 spare hours. Well, that means I'm using 8 hours to do this. Now, once that's done, obviously you want to be very cognizant of burnout. You don't want to put yourself in a position where you completely fizzle out and you can't keep doing things. So you take your foot, at least me, take your foot off the gas a little bit, especially if you're getting momentum. But you become strategic and like, all right, well, let me double my efforts on getting interviews, because I'll be in that conversation for an hour, but then that'll reach X number of people, and that'll always be online. That'll be serving me in perpetuity. Let me, again, make YouTube videos. Let me do whatever I can. So some days it's working 24/7. Other days I'll work less than an hour a day. But that's depending if I really want to give myself permission to take the foot off the gas. And I've already got a momentum of tens of thousands of books sold at the very least before even doing that.
Yeah. I love how the fundamentals don't change there. Because that's one of the, like Jason said, that's, it's a struggle for some authors to think, oh, I got to go and put myself out there. Yeah, you do. If you want to do this, right? If you don't feel the message matters that much, then you won't do it. But if it's essential to you, like if it's critical, if you know something that you like, this is going to change people's lives, and I'm the one who's been given the message, then I've got to carry it to the market. And then you'll do stuff that, takes energy, takes time, takes resources, takes money. But it's worth it because you're getting the message into people's hands and it's affecting them in positive and meaningful ways. And
yes.
when you get to, when it gets right down to brass tacks, it's being seen versus not being seen, being heard versus not being heard, talking one more time about it versus saying, shut up, never mind, wasn't, and I think that's, you have to be smart about it. You have to be strategic about it, but you do have to get out there and talk.
Yeah. And so there's a lot more to it. And you look at athletes, and human beings are very interesting in that we intellectually get certain things, but we also automatically project. And it's like, you go out to a baseball game and you watch these people throw around a baseball for 3 hours, and you know that they do more than that, but your brain's only perceiving them as working 3 hours a day. It's like, no, they're in the weight room. They're under an immense amount of stress. They're maybe looking at tape. Like if people saw, and I'm not saying, they deserve those millions of dollars. That's up to you. It's like, what does the market demand? Who cares? It's a whole different conversation. But if people saw how much a professional athlete spends, like how much time they spend, how much effort and energy they expend so that they can go out for those 3 hours in front of a crowd, they would be floored. And a lot of people wouldn't even want to do it. No. Same with entertainers and performers. Like you watch them dancing and singing on a stage or whatever, and you think, anybody could do it. No, it's just the opposite. That's why so few people actually do, is because number one, not everybody has the talent. Okay, that we'd have different levels of talent, but the big decisive factor there is who's willing to do the work. Who's willing to actually do the kind of levels of rehearsal and preparation and choreography and, fine tuning and sound checks and, dress rehearsals, tech rehearsals, all that kind of stuff. It is no small amount of work, and neither is spreading a message. What we tell people oftentimes is think of the lifestyle of someone running for national office. We're going into an election year. There's two people who are going to be on the road every day of their lives, giving one interview after another, answering the same questions over and over again, right? Shaking hands, kissing babies, going to rallies, going to burger joints, posing for pictures, signing autographs over and over and over and over again. And for what? Well, they care very deeply about it. It matters to them. Whatever their reasons, whatever their motives, I don't want to get into that, but it matters immensely to them. And that's why they do it. And here's the good, and the good news is the stuff that I'm telling people, again, a way, not the way, but the stuff I'm recommending to people, they can do from the comfort of their own home. They don't have to go out on the road. They don't have to be out in the cold or the heat, whatever time of year it is. They don't have to face negativity in person if that's what's going on. They could sit in their office or sit in their bedroom and set up their computer, set up their laptop, set up their camera, and just go to work there. They can do everything from the comfort of their own home if they really want to, and yet still simultaneously be so invested in their message, in their book, and most importantly in their reader, that they're making a real dent in the universe, as Steve Jobs used to say.
Yeah.
Well, that underscores the necessity for putting in the effort, putting in the work required to get the results. There's no easy win. And when there is, it's sometimes easily lost. So, if an author is looking to, sell 100,000 copies, they should pick up your book, 3 Words I Use to Sell 100,000 Books, which is referring to the other book you've got there, The Last Law of Attraction book you'll ever need to read. Give us again a quick recap of what a author is going to learn from reading that book.
Really, well, as the title implies, it's me giving the whole map of what I did in order to successfully sell 100,000 copies of one of my books. And it's going to be through the lens of the 3 words. But again, the 3 words are not enough. It's about saying, okay, with these 3 words in mind, how can you be strategic in your marketing? How can you title your book in the right way? How could you make the cover that can't be missed? How can you put yourself in, how can you make an impression on interviews that people actually remember you? Do you want to be the podcast episode that keeps getting clicked on or keeps getting shared? How do you do these things? And by the way, how do you get away with not doing all of them if you don't want to do all of them? Like, just about learning, well, let's show you a high level way of doing 20 things. And you decide, do you want to do 6 of them? Do you want to do 20 of them? Do you want to do 3 of them? Do you want to do 10 of them? Whatever it might be. And really for me, it's just a breakdown going into all these different important things about selling a book. And then at the end, I do this wrap up chapter where I show how everything ties together from a 30,000 foot view, so that when people implement any step in what I recommend, they automatically not only understand the value and power of that step, but they understand how easily it connects to any of the other things that they're talking about. It's not even within the framework where they can, just to give one piece from the book away for people. One thing I teach, I call it the Amazon Squint test. And all this is if you're designing the cover or you're paying someone to design your cover for you, with the understanding that people have a really small attention span and people are scrolling really fast. If your cover comes up really small on the computer screen at the size that Amazon displays it, do people have to squint to read it? If they do, if there's effort there, there's something wrong with your cover. Versus a thing where instantly, automatically, they can clearly read the words. They understand you're not too fancy, which means if you've titled your book properly also, they get to understand what's in it for them and they get to make another decision based on that. All about being really strategic in the context of 3 specific words I teach, being really smart, being really efficient, being really effective, and actually reaching people with your book.
And I want to add to that, you use the word strategic. Many times people think strategy is somehow complicated. And a lot of times the most strategic things we do are the simplest things we do. Mm-hmm. Yet they're so easily overlooked when it's not a path we've been down before.
It's almost like we overlook it if it's too simple, not believing it could work. It's like, no, keep it simple. It works.
Yeah. And try to, and the way you do that, I have always counseled our authors is try to picture yourself in the position of the person you would want to read your book. They're picking it up at an airport, they got a flight to catch, or they're browsing in a bookstore, or they're just scrolling on Amazon, or they're passing through social media. What would they want to run into? What would stop them? And they would spend just a little bit more time than they do. And, all those elements that you're talking about, that's really important. When we did this one, More Wealth, Less Taxes, that's one of the things I said to Lance. I was like, what are people going to get if they read your book? Well, they're going to make more money and they're not going to have to pay as much in taxes in retirement. Okay, then let's call it More Wealth, Less Taxes, because that's simple, right? Anybody can look at that and say, if I read this book, I'm going to grow my wealth and I'm not going to have to pay, a substantial amount of taxes. So,
all that accomplished in only 4 words.
There you go.
Well, Andrew, people can pick up your book at Amazon. That's what I heard.
Where else?
Yeah. Obviously all my books are available on Amazon. If anyone wants a fast link to go to all the US listings, they can go to awesomemarvelous.com. But again, anyone all over the world, they just look at their local regional Amazon and they'll find the books waiting. And if people don't want to pull out their wallet, if they're interested in the law of attraction stuff, I also have a YouTube channel that goes into that so they can watch all those videos for free. Everything they can find, whether it's the books or YouTube or anything else, can be found at awesomemarvelous.com. Half of those can be found at andrewkap.com. And either way, I hope that the content serves people in any way, shape, or form.
Well, fantastic. I really appreciate digging into that with you. And this 3 words I use to sell 100,000 books. It's, to me, sounds like a book that every author should read and consider the strategies involved in that before they even write their book, so they understand the road ahead of them. Well, Paul, that's any closing thoughts?
As we like to tell authors, the best time to market a book is before you've even written it, and especially before you've published it. And I think, Andrew, your book, as well as what you teach in your Law of Attraction book, are fundamental to that. I've always admired and appreciated your work for that reason. We've had a great time chatting with you today. We hope to have you back again someday soon. And until the next episode, my name is Paul Edwards. This is my co-host, Jason Todd, and you have been listening to the Emissary Authors Podcast. See you next time.